So I've told this story before, but it probably bears repeating given the occasion. In 2006, I was falling out of love with professional wrestling. I had reached that age in your mid-teens, like most wrestling fans do, where we all go in one of two directions. We all either accept that professional wrestling was a mere folly of our childhood, and we will move into adulthood to read Ulysses and other such serious endeavors, or we will go in the other direction and embrace pro wrestling for life, usually. 2006 was my crossroads. 2006 was my moment where I could have went in either direction. I was disenchanted with WWE at the time. I wasn't particularly aware of the broader scene outside of WWE at the time. I knew it existed, but I'd never watched any of it. So there I sat, at the professional wrestling crossroads, at the wee age of 14, thinking, this could be it. I could just go do serious things for the rest of my life and leave behind the whimsical world of professional wrestling. But then, my brother returned from holidays and gave me the gift of the Best of the X Division Volume 2. Now, that was not my first exposure to TNA. I would have watched bits and bobs on the wrestling channel over here, but it was mostly like the utter rubbish of the Asylum days where you would tune in and see the Hard 10, which is amazing in one way, but probably not the first thing you want to be introduced to from TNA. You maybe want a bit of AJ, or maybe a bit of AMW, or maybe a bit of X Division first before they're like, hey, let's unleash the nonsense chaos that is TNA wrestling on you. So my brother brought me back that Best of the X Division Volume 2 DVD, and I popped it in, and I saw wrestlers like Chris Sabin, and wrestlers like Alex Shelley, and wrestlers like Sanjay Dutt, and wrestlers like P.D. Williams, and of course, wrestlers like AJ Styles, wrestlers like Christopher Daniels, wrestlers like Samoa Joe. A whole generation of wrestlers that I did not know existed, other than to see in names in Promotion Wars. For all that time I saw how highly rated Chris Sabin was. I'd never actually seen him wrestle, so by the time I did get that DVD I was like, oh, this is why he's very highly rated in Promotion Wars. Now I get it. But I fell in love with that generation of the X Division, with those particular wrestlers. Those were my gateway into the world beyond, if you will. And from that moment, I watched the primetime special that featured the debut of Kurt Angle, the in-ring debut of Kurt Angle, where he wrestled Abyss, and also that had the Christian versus Rhino 6 Sides of Steel barbed wire cage match. And from there, I was like, I guess this is my lot in life. I'm a TNA wrestling guy. I watched every show the company has ever produced that is available on tape. There's some explosions and whatnot that aren't available on tape that I would like to watch. I watched them more than once in many cases. I began buying TNA merchandise. I could not help but be sucked into the TNA merchandise world that Don West led me into, where there would be the Don West Daily Deals on TNA Today, where he'd give you like 15 DVDs for the price of 4 and throw in like a signed photo of Sting or a signed photo of Christian Cage. I still, to this day, have signed photos of Christian Cage and Kurt Angle on my wall that I got in a Don West Daily Deal in 2007. I began writing about TNA in 2009. The first time I was ever actually paid to write something was in 2016 for Fighting Spirit magazine, and I had the pleasure to write multiple articles for them. And for the last 4.5 years, it has been my literal full-time living from Impact Wrestling. So when I think about all that, and I try to summarize, well, 20 years of TNA, 20 years of this company. There is so much that can go through your mind, so many different ups and downs, so many different feelings about what TNA was, what TNA could have been, probably what TNA should have been, and just as importantly, what TNA wasn't or didn't end up being. And trying to sort through all those feelings with a combination of nostalgia, with a combination of regret, a little bit, and then just a sprinkling of longing for what could have been, is quite difficult. Because when I think of TNA, when I really feel nostalgic for TNA, it is those early days on Spike TV. I watched the Barry Scott narrated opening package to that October 1st, 2005 episode of Impact, the first episode on Spike TV, and you feel something. You feel that this company was actually on the precipice of greatness. It wasn't just a line that Barry Scott probably said in that video package. It felt real. You felt like they were the future of professional wrestling. You felt like they were the new face of professional wrestling. And any time I think about TNA history, that's where my mind inevitably wanders. It's the version of TNA that existed in that moment, that felt, for the first time in the history of the company, and maybe for very few times after that, actually felt like the best form the company could possibly take. And I miss it, I want it, and I get a little mad that it didn't sustain. Because every single time the company would take steps toward being its best self, somebody would come swinging in like a wrecking ball, insisting it should be like something that used to be. Whether it was Vince Russo and his car crash TV and his refusal to let the style of the late 90s die, whether it was Eric Bischoff and their complete upending of everything that was TNA at the time, whether it was Bruce Pritchard or anybody else that had a position of power, John Gaburick, all coming from either WCW or WWE and trying to turn TNA into some version of WCW or WWE from the past. All of those people, I'm still a little angry at them. And I shouldn't be. It's been too long to be a little angry at them, but I still feel that little bit of anger toward these people who just refuse to let the past go. These people who refused to move on and look at the future and look at what fans wanted now instead of what fans used to want. To look at what TNA was at its best instead of the weird, deformed version of TNA they wanted it to be to appeal to an audience that didn't exist anymore. And I can't let that go. I really can't. It sits there in my heart, stewing just a little bit, that those people were so short-sighted and so ignorant and so deluded in their own vision of what wrestling used to be that they couldn't just let TNA be TNA. They couldn't let it be the place where AJ Styles was the best goddamn wrestler in the world. They couldn't let it be the place where Samoa Joe was the most authentic, believable professional wrestler you will ever see in your life. No matter how many work shoots you'll do, they will never live up to the believability of Samoa Joe as a character. They couldn't just let it be the place where the Motor City Machine Guns are the tag team of the next generation, both in terms of personality and most importantly in terms of style. The team that would lead the genre into the future and would influence generations of wrestlers to come after them. They couldn't just let LAX be the Hispanic act that you are desperately trying to appeal to with pandering, and they're just sitting there organically waiting for you to let them be that. Except no, you have to try and work out what that audience wants, instead of just presenting kick-ass wrestlers that they'll like. You couldn't just let the Amazing Red be the next generation of Rey Mysterio, one of the best high flyers in the history of US wrestling. You had to make him sangriento and put a mask on him. And every time I think about how when Eric Bischoff comes in with Hulk Hogan, they're like, what if AJ Styles was a mini-me Ric Flair and Abyss is a mini-me Hulk Hogan? They couldn't just let Abyss be one of the best big men in professional wrestling and let him kick ass and be TNA's guy. You had to make him Hulk Hogan. And I know I should let that anger go. I know I should. It's immature to keep holding on to that anger. But every time my mind wanders back, every time I think about that best version of TNA, that best version of AJ, that best version of Joe, that best version of Abyss, it's still there. But this is TNA's 20th anniversary. 20 years. Maybe today's not the day where we mourn what TNA wasn't, but rather celebrate what it was. Because while some of those moments were fleeting, while some of those moments didn't last nearly as long as they should have, when we got them, they were glorious. When AJ Styles was just allowed be AJ Styles and had one of the best runs of pay-per-view matches you will ever see in your life in 2005, he delivered a body of work that cemented his place as legitimately one of the best wrestlers of all time. When TNA allowed the X Division to be a division about the best high-flying wrestlers in the world competing, not with triple threat rules, not with referee camera hats, not with weird six-man tag team stables, remember that, end of 2016? That didn't last long. But just let great wrestlers go out there and have great wrestling matches, and that was enough. It was glorious. When you would have AJ Styles and Low Ki and Jerry Lynn building the foundation of the division. When you would have AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, and Samoa Joe taking that foundation to another level. When you would have Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley and P.D. Williams and Sanjay Dutt and DJZ and Trevor Lee and all of these wrestlers who would try to take that division to a new level, and Josh Alexander all the way in 2021 having one of the best X Division title runs of all time. When you would just let those wrestlers do their damn thing, to quote BG James. When you would allow wrestlers to be honestly funny and show their actual personality, not in overwrought stories or badly written jokes, but just with the Team 3D funeral allowing James Storm to show his personality, or the Paparazzi Championship Series allowing the X Division and Kevin Nash to tell a bunch of silly dumb jokes, or the Aces and Eights funeral just burying your own angles, or all the way up to Swingers Palace with a bunch of goofy, funny, heartwarming at times comedy, when you would allow wrestlers to be silly and funny and engaging in a way that other companies wouldn't. Other companies were just doing pies and faces, and you had actual jokes and wrestlers with charm and personality and humor, and a rare wrestling show that was actually funny at times. When you would allow the Knockouts division to actually be pro wrestlers, which was such a stark contrast to what other people were doing in professional wrestling at the time. And when you look at what Gail Kim and Awesome Kong did, you realize these women should be here in main events, and god damn it, they deserve it. God damn it, they've earned it, and god damn it, it's long overdue. And it changed wrestling. So rather than focus on the bad, which I've done a decent amount of already, to be fair, let's talk about what TNA was at its best, what TNA still is, what Impact Wrestling still is at its best right now, and that is the land of invention and reinvention. The place for AJ Styles to have a platform that he would not have gotten anywhere else to do what he can do best in the ring. The place where you get things like Ultimate X. The place where you get things like the Knockouts division. The place where you get wrestlers like Samoa Joe and Christopher Daniels and the Motor City Machine Guns and LAX. And America's Most Wanted, and great tag team wrestling, and great cruiserweight wrestling, and great women's wrestling. Things that were not always prominent in mainstream US wrestling during the 20 years of TNA, that TNA gave a platform to, that TNA gave an opportunity to thrive. When you look at innovations in broadcasting with dual entrance ways and great announcing, and even little things like sweeping overhead camera shots and green lasers and cutting little holes in the steel cage so you can actually see the cage match better, and embracing digital platforms long before anybody else did. That's the invention of TNA. Was it always good invention? Hell no. You got the electric steel cage, you got the Fish Market Street Fight, which is actually good. Go back and watch the Fish Market Street Fight, that is actually legitimately good. But you would get the Last Rites and the Reverse Battle Royal. You would get the invention that's not necessarily the invention people would want, but you also get Ultimate X. And then you get reinvention. You get people like Matt Hardy being able to go to TNA and reinvent themselves in a meaningful way, being able to do things that they would not be able to do elsewhere, introduce characters and match types and story structures that they would not be able to do elsewhere. That's what TNA were willing to give, a platform to Sting, to become Joker Sting and try something weird and new and that people latched onto and thought was pretty cool for a character that was 30 years old. A place where somebody like Steve Macklin can go from being a wrestler that nobody on earth cares about, nobody on earth even knows is good because he's simply not given the opportunity, and Impact's the place where he can get that opportunity. Invention and reinvention. At its very best, at its core, take away what it could have been, take away what it should have been, what it was at its best, was a place where you could see the kind of wrestling that other companies were simply not interested in offering, and seeing older wrestlers given a chance to redeem themselves, reinvent themselves, or be their best selves. I don't think I'll ever quite be able to leave the anger go. It'll still sit there, stewing, until I explode someday. But at the very least, we can focus on all the things TNA did well, all the things people have fond memories of TNA for, and all the things that are worth celebrating here on 20 years of TNA wrestling.